I had rehearsed the eulogy a dozen times in the mirror, but nothing prepares you for the moment your voice trembles in a church full of grief. Dad's casket sat just beyond the pulpit, walnut wood polished to a gloss that caught the morning light like it was trying to pretend this was all still beautiful. I stood with trembling hands, the folded paper of my speech damp at the edges. Grief clings like wet wool then. I smelled it, jasmine and citrus, with a powdery undercurrent. Nuit Etterly, by Estelle and Gale. My perfume. The one I wore the night Nathan proposed under the string lights of that vineyard in Sonoma. Wore a fitted black dress with sleeves that flared like wings. Her golden hair was in perfect waves. She smiled at someone just out of view. Though burgundy, like the one Juliet had complimented at Christmas 2 years ago, he didn't look at me right away. He was too busy brushing something from her cheek. Not guilt, not regret, something colder. Calculation, maybe. People whispered, turned, to glance at me, then back to them. The service began. I didn't hear a word. It was like trying to breathe underwater. Every breath, heavy with salt and silence. I looked down at the paper in my hand and saw the smudge where my thumb had pressed into the ink. When it was my turn to speak, I moved like a marionette, each step heavier than the last. Judgment and cleared my throat. My voice cracked before the first line and I saw Juliet smirk. I should have walked away. Instead, I read the speech Dad had helped me write in bits and pieces during his final months. My knees nearly gave out, but I made it back to my seat. As they carried his casket outside, I followed slowly. The cemetery was quiet save for the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a bird overhead. When the first handful of dirt hit the wood, I flinched, and then, as if the moment needed more cruelty, Juliet leaned in close and whispered, "Guess he preferred someone who doesn't bore him to death." I turned to her, my eyes wide, my lips parted, but nothing came out. Even flinch, just placed a gentle hand on her back as if to say, "That's enough." Touches to my shoulder. I nodded, thanked them, not really hearing what they said. Juliet and Nathan left first. Of course they did. She wore my perfume like a trophy. He wore her like armor. I lingered at Dad's grave long after the others had gone. The sun dipped low, casting golden light on the headstone. I placed a single photo beside it, one of Dad and me at my college graduation. He had his arm around me, beaming with that crooked smile that said, "I'm proud, but don't make a big deal out of it." I didn't cry. "Dad," I whispered. I couldn't. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. A chill danced down my spine. That day, I buried more than my father. Quietly, like a tectonic plate. It would take time, years even. But the aftershocks were coming. She was the kind of woman who lit up rooms or set them on fire depending on the mood. I, on the other hand, was the steady one, the planner, the one who knew how to change the air filter and remember Dad's medication schedule, even as children. The differences were clear. When Juliet danced in recitals, people brought flowers. Met at a nonprofit gala I nearly skipped because I had work the next day. He was there on behalf of a client, something about urban redevelopment. He laughed. I liked that he didn't flinch. Nathan was gentle in the way I thought only books could be. He listened like the world had gone quiet just for my voice. Our courtship was quiet, private, little coffee shops, shared playlists, nights reading side by side. For once, someone saw the quiet parts of me and didn't try to talk over them. When I finally introduced him to Juliet at a Christmas dinner, she walked in late as usual, swathed in red silk and apologies. Her perfume filled the hallway before her voice did. She kissed my cheek, smiled at Nathan and said, "You're even better looking than she described." He blushed. She winked. She complimented his tie. He laughed. Too long, too loud. I noticed. I always noticed, but I didn't say anything. That was my role, to observe. Too smooth. I told myself it was just Juliet being Juliet. Harmless, charming, and Nathan. He was just nervous. First family dinner, that's all. Still, that night I wore the red lipstick she'd left in my drawer months earlier. Nathan said it looked unexpected in a good way, but his tone was distant, evaluative. "Flights are expensive," she said while posting poolside photos from a Moroccan villa. "I just can't handle hospitals," she texted. But somehow I could. I always could. Nathan stepped up. He brought Thai food on nights I forgot to eat. Sat on the porch with me while I cried over test results and insurance calls. He started sleeping over at first, on the couch, then beside me, holding me through my nightmares. Those nights felt like hope. We whispered about eloping. "Just the two of us," he'd say, tracing circles on my palm, but Juliet never really left. She floated through our conversations, like smoke. "You and your sister have the same laugh," Nathan once said as we folded laundry. "But yours is softer, less performative." I laughed. After I wore my hair curled, he said, "You should do that more. It reminds me of that night Juliet visited." I didn't say anything, just nodded, pressing the warmth of the curling iron into the drawer like it might burn the memory away. The engagement was simple, just us, a bottle of wine and the vineyard where we had our second date. He gave me a ring with a small antique sapphire, something with history, he'd said. Like us. I wore that ring with reverence. I caught myself staring at it constantly as though it could convince me everything was real, that I was chosen, that he wasn't still thinking about her. We sent out save the dates, began tasting cakes. I hung it in my closet like it was a promise. Juliet didn't RSVP, said she was figuring out some things. She never asked how I was, never offered to help. Then Dad's health took another turn. Hospice, painkillers, the quiet kind of dying that happens in chapters. Nathan stayed less. Work's picking up, he said. You understand, right? Of course I did. I always understood. I was fluent in self-abandonment. When Dad passed, Juliet called. No tears. Just let me know when the funeral is. I'll try to make it. Smell wrapped around me like a warning. She's coming for everything you love. I didn't believe it, not until Nathan walked out behind her. Old ceiling. The signs were always there. I just kept painting over them. Grief has a strange sense of timing. It doesn't arrive when it's supposed to at the service, at the burial. During the condolences, it waits, it lurks. Then it hits you while standing barefoot on a cold hardwood floor, days after everything's supposed to be over. It had been a week since the funeral. The air still held the sharp edge of early spring, all budding trees and brittle wind. Was exactly as I remembered, pine cleaner, old paperbacks. And his cologne faintly soaked into the leather of the armchair he refused to replace. But something felt off. The photo on the entryway table was gone. In the bedroom, the drawers were pulled open. The jewelry box sat gutted on the dresser, empty, except for the pale velvet engagement ring, box open, hollow, mocking. I stared at it, unmoving for what felt like hours. The same box Nathan had slipped into his coat pocket the day he proposed, the box that once held the sapphire ring, modest and antique, chosen because it had history. Now it was just void. A reminder that I no longer had a place in any of the stories we used to tell. On instinct, I pulled out my phone, not to call anyone. I had no one to call. To seek evidence of what my gut already knew. Nathan's Instagram was now public. He had unfollowed me. There they were, him and Juliet. In Rome, matching gray wool coats. Her hand resting on his chest like she'd planted a flag. His arm around her waist, confident and proprietary. Shudder that followed. I sank onto the rug, knees folding under me, hands shaking like I'd swallowed a live wire. The caption read, "Found love in grief." I laughed. A short, breathless sound that cracked in the center. Then the sobs came. Loud, ugly, animalistic. I clutched the empty ring box like it might explain something. Like it might hurt less if I held it tightly enough. I screamed into the carpet, punched the cushion of Dad's chair, pulled every book from the shelf and scattered them across the floor. His annotated copy of The Grapes of Wrath split in two. I broke things that never hurt me. The walls stayed silent. The house didn't judge. Surrounded by broken frames and torn pages, I noticed one photo still intact on the floor. I picked it up with trembling hands. Dad and me, my college graduation. His arm around me, that crooked half smile he wore when he was trying not to cry. I was wearing the blue dress he'd picked out for me because it brings out your eyes, kiddo. I sat there for a long time, cradling the photo like it was the only real thing I had left. That was when I noticed the necklace was gone too. The one Dad had promised me since I was 13, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant shaped like a compass. To find your way, even when you feel lost, he'd said. She took it, Juliet. She had come into our father's house while I was still drowning in funeral arrangements and taken it. As if she were the rightful heir to everything, including the grief she hadn't earned. Nathan took my future. She took my past. And I was standing in the debris of both. Not as a fiancé. Maybe not even as a person that night. I lay on the floor of my father's study with the blanket over me and the photo pressed to my chest. I stared at the ceiling for hours, watching shadows shift with the headlights of passing cars. No one texted, no one called. I could disappear, quietly, entirely, and the world would keep spinning, like I had never been here. But somewhere in the middle of that thought, something shifted. Not rage. Not yet. Just a fragile, flickering awareness. If I was truly invisible to them. I didn't leave a note. No one deserved a goodbye, not Juliet. Grabbed my father's old car keys and drove away while the sun was still unraveling the fog. The house looked smaller in the rearview mirror, like it had finally exhaled now that I was gone. I didn't have a destination, only a direction. West. Each hour that passed on the road peeled a layer from my old self. Of betrayal, the silence of empty rooms, the humiliation of seeing my ring on her hand. Every mile was a quiet scream of survival. I stopped when a coastal place with chipped paint and salt-damp porches, where gulls screamed, like they had something to mourn. I found the room above the cafe by accident. It was tucked between a bookstore and a hardware shop. The sign read La Pain Perdue, though it was written so faintly it looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. The smell of rosemary bread floated into the street, warm and anchoring. Inside, a woman stood behind the counter arranging pears in a bowl that was too small to hold them all. She looked up and smiled without expectation. Room's still empty. Upstairs, she said. Bed's lumpy, but the view is clean. She never asked mine. I moved in that night. The room had creaky floors. I didn't change anything. It felt honest. Every morning I went downstairs and took the seat by the window. Mireille served coffee and soup, never asking if I wanted them, only setting them down with a soft eat before it cools. She understood without probing. I hadn't sketched in years, but my hand found its way to the pencil again. At first it was just lines, messy, chaotic, then faces, a seagull, a pair of clasped hands, eventually my own reflection. The way I remembered it before everything crumbled. The sea was kind to people like me. It didn't ask who you used to be. Then came fragments, memories of childhood, my father's voice. I wrote until the ink smudged under my fingertips. The cafe grew to feel like a chapel. People came and went. Some smiled, some didn't. Mireille's soup changed every day. No recipes, no names. She told me once the best meals are made from what you have left. Eventually, I offered to help her with her books. Numbers made more sense to me than emotions. Balancing the ledger gave me something I hadn't felt in months. Control your precise, she said, handing me receipts in a shoebox. She paid me in bread, soup, and space. That was enough. I still didn't talk much, but silence didn't feel like punishment here. It was a cocoon. One evening, I walked the edge of the shore as the sky turned to lavender. I watched a couple walk ahead of me, hands clasped. The woman laughed, not like Juliet, not like someone trying to be adored, just laughed. And I realized something. I didn't miss Nathan. I missed the version of me who believed in him. The girl who thought quiet love was enough, that loyalty guaranteed reciprocation, that wearing his ring meant safety. That version of me had, but a woman who could become time softened things, but it didn't erase them. A year had passed since I'd vanished. Since I'd let myself dissolve into the fog of a quiet town where grief could rest without being picked apart, and in that time, something remarkable happened. I stopped flinching at memories. The nightmares faded. The image of my ring on Juliet's hand grew dim, like an old bruise beneath fabric. I no longer needed to explain myself, not to anyone, not even to the version of me that had once begged to be chosen. The woman I became didn't beg. She built it, started slowly. First, with helping Mireille keep her cafe afloat. Then, with neighbors asking for help balancing budgets. A retired fisherman needed help with his pension paperwork. A local artist didn't know how to file her taxes. Eventually, I created my own small firm, Whitmore & Co., named for my father. For the man who taught me steadiness, loyalty, like the one on his old necklace, the one Juliet stole. But this version pointed only one direction. Forward, my days filled with numbers and clients. My evenings with soup, sketchbooks, and walks along the shore. I wore linen and no makeup. I read poetry again. I even started running badly, but persistently. I ran like someone chasing herself, or maybe running toward her. And then the envelope came. Heavy cream paper, gold-embossed script. No return address, but I knew before I opened it. Juliet and Nathan invite you to celebrate the beginning of their forever... A. Vineyard wedding, June. Formal attire. I ran my fingers over the lettering. They hadn't changed. Still curating a life. For the camera, still performing perfection for strangers. It didn't sting. Not in the way they wanted. It just made me smile. Because suddenly, I saw it. I saw the moment her eyes would widen. The moment his lips would tighten. The moment they'd see that I wasn't buried. I was blooming. So I made a call. Elijah Davenport had been my closest friend in college. Brilliant, warm, and always humming some forgotten jazz melody. We lost touch when life took us in opposite directions, but I found him again through a mutual friend's obituary. Lost his wife the previous year. Our reconnection was gentle. Emails turned into calls. Calls turned into long, meandering conversations about architecture, grief, and how some things can only be understood in hindsight. He didn't ask for the full story, just listened. Respected the pauses. When the invitation arrived, I mentioned it to him half-jokingly. He went quiet for a beat. Then said, "Do you need a +1 with broad shoulders and an unshakable sense of decorum?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I think I do." Elijah flew in 2 days before the wedding. He wore a navy suit and brought a small bouquet of rosemary and forget-me-nots for memory. He said, "We rehearsed nothing. We didn't need to." The morning of the wedding, I dressed slowly. I chose a dark emerald gown, off-shoulder, simple, with a high slit and low expectations. I pinned my hair back with a silver comb Muriel gave me on my last birthday. She said it was to remind you of the shine you don't always see in yourself. I looked in the mirror and saw someone new, someone I could learn to love. We arrived just before the ceremony started. The vineyard stretched like velvet across the hills. Lush, curated, sterile. The kind of place Juliet would choose. The kind of place Nathan would let her as we walked toward the ceremony site. I felt eyes turn, and then her eyes. Juliet turned from a group of guests, laughing as always, but when she saw me, her laughter caught in her throat like glass. Her expression twisted, faltered, recovered, but not fast enough. I watched her mask crack. It was beautiful. Nathan looked up, froze. I held Elijah's arm just a bit tighter and smiled. Not smug, not superior, just whole. "Congratulations," I said softly. Walking past them, Juliet blinked rapidly. Nathan opened his mouth. I don't know to say what, but no sound came, just the tightening of his jaw, a flicker of something in his eyes that looked like lost. Not of me. Of power. Elijah and I took our seats. The ceremony unfolded in soft music and curated vows. I watched without flinching. She wore white lace, of course. He looked polished, but there was a tension in their hands, a stiffness in their smiles. They held each other like hostages in a well-lit dream. Afterward, at the reception, guests buzzed around like bees in silk and cologne. I stood with a glass of champagne, listening to someone describe their tech startup when Juliet approached. Her voice was too sweet. "I didn't expect you to come." I looked her straight in the eye. "I know," she laughed, brittle, bird-like. "You look different." "I am different." Nathan hovered behind her, silent. He looked like he wanted to say something. "Maybe I'm sorry, or you look amazing, or what have I done?" But I didn't give him the space. I turned to Elijah. "Shall we walk?" And just like that, I left them standing there with their wine, their vows, and their delusion that they had won something. I didn't need to shatter their illusion. My presence already had it. Didn't happen with a fight. There was no screaming. On a rainy doorstep that would have made Juliet the star again. And I was done giving her the stage. The real reckoning came weeks after the wedding, in something far quieter, a letter, handwritten and folded into an envelope yellowed with age. The ink on the front was mine, but the return address was written in a familiar crooked scrawl, W. Whitmore, Dad's handwriting. The last note he'd written to me before he passed, one of several he left in a small box under his desk, labeled, "In case I go before I finish teaching you everything." He always joked about dying as if it were an appointment he hadn't fully confirmed. I had read this particular note so many times it felt etched into my skin, but I sealed it back inside the envelope and mailed it to Juliet. Inside, tucked beside the letter, I placed the necklace. His necklace, the one with the gold compass. The one he promised me when I was 13 after I got lost at the state fair, and came back crying but proud I'd found the exit on my own. "This," he said, placing it in my palm, "will always point you home." Means she had stolen it like everything else. But this time I was the one returning it. Not as a gift, as a mirror. The letter read, "Juliet, you were always the star. Loud, brilliant, demanding attention. But your sister, she was the root system. The quiet one holding everything steady beneath the surface. I never worried about the family legacy because I knew she'd carry it with grace. This necklace isn't about inheritance. It's about direction. It was never meant to dazzle. It was meant to anchor. Love, Dad." 3 days later she called. Not texted, called. When I picked up, she didn't say hello. She just started crying. "I didn't know he wrote that to you," she whispered. I didn't know. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. "He's not the same," she added, her voice cracking. "Nathan, he's cold, withdrawn. He stays out late." That made me blink. Not out of pain, but disbelief. Regret. Now, she kept talking. "I thought you'd understand. I don't know. I thought he was my second chance. Real time, smooth out the jagged lines, paint over betrayal with confusion and desperation." It was like listening to someone cling to a crumbling wall, begging it not to collapse. I finally spoke. "You can't steal love and expect it to stay," I said, softly. She inhaled sharply, like I'd punched her. Then I hung up a month later. Elijah and I were married beneath a weeping willow on a bluff above the sea. There were 12 people there, including Muriel, who brought wildflower, honey, and a loaf of bread, warm enough to melt butter on contact. The only jewelry I wore was a silver comb in my hair. No necklace. Some things are meant to be let go, especially when you no longer need them to feel anchored. My dress wasn't white. It was slate blue, the color of stormy water and rebirth. I hadn't planned it, but as I stood beneath the branches, I realized it was the same color I wore at my college graduation, the day Dad said, "That's my girl." Elijah held my hands with a gentleness that didn't shake. When he said his vows, he didn't talk about forever. He talked about mornings, about waking up beside someone who doesn't shrink themselves to fit a frame. "They didn't build, I don't need you to fill space," he said. "I just want to walk beside you in it." I cried for the first time in months. Not from pain, from relief. We didn't post any photos. There was no announcement, no digital slideshow, just a memory stored in salt and wind in rosemary pinned to his lapel, in cake that crumbled when cut, imperfect and real. And I never heard from Juliet again. She never returned the letter. Never responded after that final call. Last I heard, through a cousin, she and Nathan had separated, quietly. No drama, just faded like old wallpaper. But that wasn't my story anymore. Mine was this. Every morning I walked barefoot too. The porch with a cup of coffee, watching the ocean breathe. I ran a firm that made small businesses feel safe. I laughed deeply now, from the gut, and sometimes I sketched again. Not as therapy, not as distraction, just as expression. Sometimes I still wore perfume, not Nuit Etoile, but something softer, earthier, lavender and bergamot. Something that smelled like fresh starts instead of anniversaries. And every now and then, I'd come across the silver comb in my drawer. The only object from that old life I still held on to. It didn't hold power. It didn't symbolize pain. It was just mine. A keepsake from the woman I became. People think revenge is fire, but it's not. Fire burns fast, then disappears. True revenge is air, invisible, steady, patient. You walk into a room and breathe easier while they choke on the memory of what they lost. She had the ring, the perfume, the spotlight, but I had the peace, the love that stayed, and a name mine that finally meant something real.